We have a special guest because over the years I have dealt with a lot of trauma and behaviors and all the things with my special needs kids. And I know that in certain spaces in our churches, we don't always recognize the trauma and the effect that it has on our kids with special needs and even our families as a whole. And so I thought, since I have such a wonderful connection with BrianJames, since he graced us in Kansas City next to us, so I thought no better person to talk to us this morning about how trauma and behaviors in ministry and special needs area is so vital that we understand all of the pieces and see all of the whole picture of actually what's going on within our kids and within special needs and the mental side of things. And so I've invited BrianJames to kind of talk a little bit about and guide us through some information that will help us as ministry leaders kind of walk into serving these families well. And so BrianJames has a ton of accolades, and I don't know them all, and I'm not even going to attempt all of them. So he does have a I guess you would call a company. Is that what that would be called? A company, Churchwell Co. that he has started, and I want him to share a little bit about that too maybe at the end or at the beginning, whatever he feels comfortable, and how he has resources for us as pastors. So I'm gonna turn it over to BrianJames, and let's do this.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy, for having me. I thank you just for leading the way in this conversation. So I am not an expert in special needs. Specifically, I want to put that as a caveat. And so I don't intend the conversation this morning to necessarily be prescriptive of how to engage some of these conversations in special needs context. Part of it, I just think contexts are so specific that there's some different conversations that happen in each of them, but also experts in some of these places like Amy, probably from a practical implementation standpoint, have some things to add to that. But what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit more broadly around how we think about trauma, how we understand trauma, how we engage trauma, both within children, within ourselves, within the family system. I think that there's some concepts and some realities that we need to be holding that very much inform how families show up in our congregations, how we engage them, that create barriers, that create obstacles, and create complications as we walk with people. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify what that intent is today. So as Amy said, I'm a Foursquare pastor. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I hold both of those roles really significantly in the work that I do and how I think about what I'm after. I really long to see the body of Christ whole and alive and able to welcome and sit with and walk with everyone. And so I have a number of different ways that I have been privileged to be able to engage that. One being Churchwell Co. that Amy mentioned, which is an organization that I created really to help the church practice being brave, and creating spaces where we can practice being brave together, where we can learn, as Paul says in Galatians, to carry one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That verse to me is really, really significant. That Paul would say something as strong as the law of Christ is fulfilled when we carry one another's burdens. And I think the conversation around special needs and families, these are families that actually very few have people who even have a framework of how to carry their burdens. And if we want to think about families that are disproportionately burdened in our communities, special needs families are real high up there on that list. And so there's a real incentive for us as the church to say, if we want to see the law of Christ fulfilled in our communities, then this question of how do we actually carry one another's burdens becomes really, really significant. So before I jump into content, I would love to ask a question and get a little bit of a response for two reasons. One, it kind of gives me a feel for what's happening in the room and where we're at, but also allows us to warm up together. That my hope is that we actually engage, converse around this. And so I'll share a little bit, but then we'll do some collective conversation around that. So as a chance to warm ourselves up into that, I'd like to hear maybe just from a few of you how you're coming into the call this morning. I know you guys had a couple hours together yesterday with Amy and in some of the conversations. And I'd love to just take a moment before jumping into content, just for us all, just to check in with ourselves and say, hey, as I'm coming into the call today, this is what I'm carrying over from yesterday. This is something that got kicked up, something that's kind of front of mind. These are questions or things that I'm carrying. So I'd love to just hear from a few of you. Where are we at as we're coming into this conversation today in this moment, either related to what happened last night or related to the conversation that we're moving toward this morning? And I'm a therapist, so I'll chill quietly. I don't mind silence. And I know some people are like, wait, is he waiting for someone to talk? Like, no, sometimes we just need room for things to percolate.
Yeah, I guess I have something to share.
Go ahead.
So I'm also just a special needs mom too, and so I've been helping at our church with this ministry as well. And I just all the stats and just the stories yesterday, I just feel like it's like such a bigger burden than what I thought. Like I have my own scope, but it's like so much bigger than that. So I've just been feeling like kind of a heaviness, but also like just contending for that space to be seen and like healing to take place for the families too. So just yeah, it was good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I'll share. Yesterday actually made me feel really excited because I feel like we've been kind of stuck needing to start something at our church, and the need is just growing. I feel like the Lord's timing is really good. I feel like He's really just placed things timing wise. Just I feel that I feel the love of God leading us and the timing of it all kind of coming together for us to be able to get equipped in something that's a need in our body. So there is, I mean, it was heavy to hear all of those statistics, and you definitely left with, wow, this is way bigger than I realized. But I have hope that like, okay, we're going somewhere, because I feel like I've been stuck for at least 6 months to a year, not knowing how to go further.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And also, just as Amy said, I know it's early and some of you are on the West Coast too. It's even earlier. Voice is totally fine. If you want to chime in, but you don't want to turn on the camera to chime in, please do not feel obligated. I know morning calls when we're waking up. So I just want to put that, if you want to, I always love to see who's talking, but also please do not feel that as an obligation. You are welcome to chime in just with your voice.
I'll say that I really appreciated the language that Amy offered yesterday for the not yet. You know, that was huge, you know, because I know, like, you know, in our context where we're at, you know, we don't have, any real special needs, kiddos right now. Nor do we actually have, the capability, to provide, for the needs of special needs kiddos, on the fly. We kind of operate with the make it work mentality. We make it work for whatever kids show up. But if someone who, showed up with complex needs, you know, it's one of those, like, what do you do, in the moment? So I really appreciated the language that, Amy offered yesterday, for the, hey, we can't make this work in the moment. But it's not that we don't want to, we want to make this work. Let's make a plan, So I really, I appreciated the language that she offered yesterday for that, so that, we could work toward a plan. We can't accommodate you now, but we want to, so let's work toward that, and that I thought was beautiful, because you're not turning people away. You're saying, we want to work with you, we just can't in the moment. Let's work toward a plan, you know? So I really appreciated that yesterday.
Yes, I love that. And that language, Amy was sharing that a little bit earlier this morning with me, that was something you guys talked about. And that is so significant because, and this will circle back around a little bit later in this hour when we're talking about things. But one of the challenges that comes up is when a barrier arises, and particularly for disenfranchised families, for whatever reason, their predominant experience of being faced with barriers is being blamed for the carrying the barrier. And to come in and go like, oh, we can't meet the need because you're too much. We can't do that. And the families get blamed for that. And what that language that Amy introduced is allowing us to do as a church is to actually lament with the family, to say, oh, you deserve to have a place where you are welcomed. And I'm going to lament with you that we're not there. But that's not a you thing. That actually, and it moves us to a place of confession where we have to acknowledge with honesty, we're not prepared actually to love you the way that you need to be loved. That's not a you thing. That's an us thing. And actually that capacity to own, to take ownership, is something that I think historically our churches have not done very well. And so people kind of come in bracing to be blamed for it. And it actually becomes a really significant part of the healing process when we can acknowledge, hey, there are things that actually you deserve that ought to be there that aren't there. And that's on us. That's not on you. We're going to work toward that. We want to try that. So I love that, Amy, you talked about that. I love that connected and made sense. That's a really significant piece with trauma as well. And we'll touch on that in a little bit more. Yeah, maybe one more person want to chime in, just kind of where are you at this morning and what's on your mind? And then we want to talk about trauma. Nice light topic for the morning. Okay. Well, feel free to raise hands, chime in, turn on your camera, interrupt. My preferred method of engagement is conversational. So I don't have any slides that I'm going to put on the screen as we talk through this. I do have slides, some handout stuff that Tammy, I will get to you for those that want to kind of do recording, and then I'll get that to you afterwards. So there is some stuff. When I'm in a virtual space, having multiple screens, and it just gets complicated, and I just want to hang out with people and have some conversation. So I'm going to break the next kind of 40 minutes into two parts. One, I want to talk about trauma itself. And then two, I want to talk a little bit about our responsibility when we bump up upon trauma or disruptive contexts in people and experiences, some things to pay attention to. So when we're talking about trauma, two frameworks that I want us to hold. The first is when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about experiences that happen too fast, or they are too big, or they occur too early for our brains to be able to make sense of. I'm going to say that again. So they're experiences, events, moments, parts of our story that hit us so quickly, or are too big, and too big can sometimes be over prolonged periods of time. It isn't just a singular event, that actually sometimes it's small events that build and build and build and build and build, and they're just too big and our brains don't know what to do with it. Or they happen before we've had a chance to prepare. Either they happen too early in our life as children, or they happen too early, thinking about particularly like with special needs families, that you have some people whose marriage wasn't even solidified. And then they entered into an experience that they were not prepared for. Their marriage wasn't prepared for it. They weren't prepared for it in their life, that it happened too soon in the formation of their family, or it was too big, or it happened too suddenly and too quickly. And part of the significance of that is how we are made to navigate through difficult moments is through making meaning of our experiences. And actually, God's created our brains in some really incredible ways to be able to, might even think in the terms of like digestion. Like our bodies are designed physically, like when we take food in, we intake food, our bodies digest the things that actually we need, and we get rid of the things that our bodies don't need. And we're designed that way. And when we're eating foods that our bodies are made to eat, that whole digestive system works really, really well. But then when we eat some food that our body is not designed to process, we end up with a whole bunch of things that start to go wrong. And the same thing is true emotionally, that actually we're designed by God to be able to navigate and process heavy moments, relational experiences, emotional experiences, and that we go through the experiences and we make meaning of them and we tell the story and we engage with them with others, and it begins to digest the stories and the experiences in our body. We keep the parts of the story that are useful in forming who we are, informing our families, and we release the parts of our story that actually no longer serve that purpose. But then some of us go through moments or have experiences or absorb things in our stories, either relational moments or emotional moments or experiences that happen that actually our bodies weren't designed to digest. I think about some of the trauma that some of the kids in our communities experience early in life, some of the traumatic moments that probably some of us on this call have gone through at various stages of like major moments of disruption in our family systems, where life as we knew it suddenly changes and is a different life. And there's these major disruptions. And actually, our bodies weren't designed to metabolize and digest these things. And so they get stuck. And when it gets stuck, actually, psychologically, almost what we do is we take those stories and we just leave them outside of ourselves. Well, okay, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to make sense of it. And I'm just going to leave it over here. But it doesn't get digested. It doesn't get metabolized. It doesn't get integrated into our narrative in a way that actually we're then able to share. We're able to engage. We're able to even allow other people to share. So if we think about that passage in Galatians of going like, carry one another's burdens, there's a couple of things that suggests. One is that people around us actually are capable of carrying our burdens with us, which this is actually part of what we're talking about is, are we able to carry the burdens of others? That's where we're going to get to in the second portion today. But even the premise of having someone carry my burdens suggests that I'm able to put my burden in a context that allows you to even come close and hold this. And one of the challenges with trauma is actually these burdens remain like out here floating around us. And actually, I don't even know what to offer you to have you hold this, that my whole body is activated in some different ways. And I don't even know how to tell my story. And I don't even know what help that I need. And I don't even know what to ask you to carry. That actually, because when we go through traumatic moments that happen too quickly, or they're too big, or they happen either too fast, too big, or too soon in life, they actually stay as these non-digested experiences that we don't know what to do with and we don't know where to put. And so this can be like physical trauma. This can be relational trauma. When we're talking about special needs families, the existence as a special needs family is actually a traumatic experience for many of those families. And so even as we're thinking about trauma in this context, I think sometimes we think about the traumatized individual. So we're looking, okay, what are the kids coming in carrying trauma? What does that look like in the life of the kid? But if we're talking about being a community and being a church, then actually part of what we're paying attention to is we have traumatized families. And not all, it isn't just trauma because a kid who was abused in the foster care system now ends up in our families. And that is a particular kind of trauma. But like Amy, I think about your family and the kids that you have welcomed in and created family with, that some of them came in with their own trauma. And that is real. And how does the family adapt to that trauma? But also now you become a family that's trying to move through the world in a way that our world is not designed for. And actually in ways that none of us can be prepared for. Like I'm a therapist. We have an adopted child that came in with trauma. And like, I got all the concepts. I know all of the things. When you get into moments that actually we are not equipped for, it's really disruptive. And it disrupts the whole system and it disrupts the whole family. So as we're thinking about trauma, yes, we want to be attentive to the traumatized individuals, the traumatized children that are coming in, but we're also recognizing, oh, we have traumatized family systems that actually have to be attended to intentionally as well. And actually sometimes the trauma of being a family with special needs, actually sometimes it impacts the parents even more than it impacts the kids. And if we're coming in and just looking at how do we create context that create accessibility for the children, which we need to do, but we overlook that we actually have traumatized parents who are coming in as part of this that also need different kinds of attention and different kinds of care, we're gonna actually create an unintentional bifurcation and actually make things worse, because where we'll end up doing is we're fighting the parents to try to serve the kids instead of caring for the whole family as a whole. So when we're thinking about trauma, we're just talking about things that are too fast, too big or happen too soon that we're not able to prepare for it and make sense of. And it creates a disruption. It creates a blockage. We might thinking on the digestive system. In some ways, it creates a form of constipation, if you will. Like things just get backed up and logged, and the family system gets emotionally bloated and relationally bloated. And if you think about like being physically constipated, what it means is actually nothing smells good. I don't want to eat anything. I'm just uncomfortable all of the time. I move around, like don't touch me, don't put food in front of my face, even though the food that is there may actually be the food that my body in theory needs. But because of the state that I am currently in, that food actually feels awful, feels aggressive, feels dangerous, and I don't want that. So thinking about this, that when we're engaging families that are traumatized, there are going to be many moments where the things that we might think to offer them may in theory be the right things. But if their digestive system, their emotional, relational digestive system hasn't been activated again, and where there isn't some room for us to actually bring some things, the things that we're offering may actually feel aggressive and harmful because there's no room for it. So we're thinking about things that are too big, too fast, too soon, that create these moments that we don't know what to do with. And the reason that becomes problematic is trauma disrupts three things that all matter. Trauma disrupts our narratives, trauma disrupts our nervous systems, and trauma disrupts our neighborhoods. And this is what I mean by that. When I talk about our narrative being how we think about our sense of self, who we think ourselves to be, that when trauma comes in, one of the worst parts of trauma is very rarely does trauma re-alter the world and then clarify what the new world is. Typically what trauma does is you thought yourself to be this way. You thought your world looked like this. Now you're no longer sure. Trauma actually puts a question mark on everything. It puts a question mark of, oh, I thought I was this kind of parent. Now I'm parenting a kid like this, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Am I a good parent? Do I know how to parent? Do I even know who I am as a person? It creates disruption in marriages and going, we thought we knew who we were as a married couple. Now actually, what does marriage look like? I don't know if I know what marriage looks like. I don't know if I know what family looks like. I don't know if I know how to show up in a community. I thought we had a plan of how we do education. Now I don't even know. It puts a question mark on everything. And when there's a question mark on everything, there's no stability anywhere. And it begins to really challenge our own sense of self, who we think of ourselves to be. And part of the significance of this is we hear, you've probably heard this, like I grew up and heard this phrase all the time of like, what other people say about you shouldn't matter. You need to know who you are. Allow like that, just hold true to who you know yourself to be. But the difficulty is like, that's not actually how we're made. That we're designed actually for the way that we see others seeing us to actually shape our sense of self and identity. And when trauma shows up, we aren't sure who we are. It disrupts. We don't know where to land and where to stand. And actually what we do is we begin to look around us for some stability and reassurance. And now we end up in a world that actually doesn't know what to do with that. And people look at us confused, which then makes us land back in the spot of going, oh, not only am I confused, I'm also confusing. And now things are even more disrupted. So trauma comes in and it really has a way of messing with our own narratives about our families, our narratives about ourselves, our narratives about the dreams, the way that we engage the world. Trauma also activates the nervous system. That when we're grounded, when we're metabolizing, when we're digesting our experiences, in the world of psychology, we talk a lot about being grounded, which just means that our breath is moving through our bodies, our blood's pumping at a regular rate, that actually our body isn't like on edge and tingling. Because when we're in a state of groundedness, we actually can pay attention, we can actually engage, we can interact relationally. When we're not grounded, it actually moves us to a place of vigilance, where we're on edge, where we're preparing for something to go wrong. When we're on edge, that means we're bracing. That actually means that we're actually already in a reactive spot, where we're not even going to receive the help we need as readily as we would when we're in a grounded, receptive place. And a lot of that hits our nervous system, right? We're thinking about entering into a new context. Like a lot of the work that I do with pastors, I remind them often, like I think we overlook just how big a deal it is for people to walk into a strange environment where they don't know people. Like that's a really, really brave thing to do. To say like in our minds, like, and I do this with a therapist too. A therapist that I train, I was like, hey, this is a safe place. I'm like, don't tell people it's safe. Like you don't It actually isn't, because they don't know you. You don't know them. You don't know what's going to come next. We hope to become safe. Right? And this is where even that not yet language, Amy, that you introduced is so significant, because it gives permission to go, okay, I don't want to overcommit to something. I can't guarantee that you're safe. I can't guarantee that I'm going to see you in a way that welcomes you and meets your needs. That actually, we're going to have to figure this out together. And the very fact that we're figuring it out together means that it's not safe. And so we have to recognize we got families that are coming in that their narratives are all over the place, that their nervous system even coming into the community of going, how am I going to be received? How am I going to be seen? Like I think we need to put a higher degree of attentiveness actually to what a big deal it is that people enter our congregations at all with needs, because it's a scary thing to say, here I am, I have needs, can you help me? The fact that they would even choose to extend that opportunity is a really big deal. So trauma impacts narrative, it impacts nervous system, and it impacts neighborhood in the sense that when trauma shows up, it breaks down relationships. And in the therapy room, one of the things that we've been paying a lot of attention to over the last 10, 15 years in particular is actually that the response of other people to our traumatic experiences actually is one of the greatest predictors of how well we heal or don't heal from trauma. So think about some of our own stories. So we have, whether it's kids go through a traumatic moment and go to a parent to say, hey, this event happened to me. The event itself was traumatic. I'm taking it to a caregiver, someone that I'm going to trust to support me, to say, hey, can you care about me? When their response minimizes the experience of going like, that is not a big deal. Why are you getting all bent out of shape about that? Now we actually have two places of suffering. One is the initial trauma, and the second one is actually how others saw us. So we went through and I'm hurting, I'm experiencing pain, and I show up and people overlook that pain. Now what that says is, I went through pain, but also I must be overreacting. There must be something wrong with me. Now it actually disrupts my narrative even more because of your response to my narrative. Now I'm even more on edge. Now our relationship begins to break down. I step back from you. And trauma just has a way of fracturing relationships that are around us. And so when we think about families that have gone through traumatic events or are living in places of trauma, that life for many special needs families is a life of chronic traumatic moments. That there are some things that kids do that actually aren't awesome. I think that's true of all kids, but there's some different levels that show up in different kinds of family systems that actually our brains aren't designed to know what to do with. And so thinking about trauma in this framework of part of what is disruptive is we don't know what to do with the things, which means we don't know how to tell our story, which means we don't know what to do or even know how to receive the help that we need. It disrupts our narratives. It disrupts our nervous system. It disrupts the relationships that we exist with around us, which is why it's really hard, like these conversations that you guys are having, to go, okay, how do we think about being churches that can create space for families with special needs? We're also saying, how do we be churches that can create space for individuals and families who carry trauma? This is not a small thing, which is actually why many churches don't do it. Like if we're sitting in the conversation, like some of us are excited, like we need it, our communities need it, but it's not programmable in a sense of like, here are 3 things that you can do and now you're on your way. Like you can do 3 things to like get in the door and begin moving that direction. But we're talking about family systems that actually have a whole lot of uncertainty, that the kids come in with disrupted narratives and disrupted nervous systems and disrupted relationships in their neighborhoods. And parents come in with disrupted narratives and disrupted nervous systems and disrupted neighborhoods. Like the level of disruption and instability that shows up to go, oh, actually stabilizing families is a much slower process than we would like. And so I want to just, that as the framework for trauma, I want to pause and say, what are you hearing? And I realize this is a little bit more broad in general, but also introduction to some concepts. We could do like a 4-hour workshop just on this segment, but for another day. But I do want to pause and say, what are you hearing? What questions do you have? What's coming up for you? What maybe needs more clarity? What doesn't make sense that I can add a little bit more clarity to?
I think that what's coming up for me in this space is trying to separate serving families and but also recognizing in my own self my own special needs, traumatic experiences. And I'm thinking, as in the body of Christ, we continually are trying to serve, but this sometimes we ignore our own things in our own spaces. And so I'm like eye-opening sometimes, like, oh yeah, there's that. And I just appreciate that when you said slowing down in the process, we want it to be a quick fix and a quick answer. And working with special needs families, none of that is really possible. It's just not. And so, but the world and the culture around us is moving so fast that we feel this is overwhelming because we have to slow down, but no one else is. And so it's why it's so important, I think, for our churches to get their head around this, is that if we don't slow down, we will run over them, or we will not serve them. We will not introduce them to a loving Father because it's too fast. So that slowing down process, I think, is vital to even attempting to make this work in the church. So I appreciate that space.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think there's one thing that we are overlooking. You know, in therapy, the first thing that we're told is that, first of all, identify your shortcomings. Identify who you are. So if some of us are going to deal with special needs children, are there some of us that actually have special needs? So can a person with special needs deal with special needs, or she has to take care of herself before dealing with children with special needs? That's what I just want to emphasize.
Yes. So one of the things, families with special needs are going to have a capacity to see that some of us who don't come from families with special needs, we don't all see the same thing. I'm particularly seeing places of pain. So actually there's a profound contribution that families with special needs can make to our communities in terms of how they see people. But the significance, and I really appreciate this question, because one of the things that it highlights is actually we have to move it beyond the individual and into a community framework. That if it is about this family with special needs serving this family with special needs, that's too small of a framework, because they're both going to end up burnt out and it's not going to be sustainable. This is where we have to actually talk about the church community. Even I would suggest when you're thinking about special needs ministries, if we're thinking about it like, here are the people that are going to be serving special needs, that's actually not a big enough framework. That really the question is our church going to be welcoming? And are we going to allow ourselves to be disrupted, that allow ourselves to slow down, to actually become more inclusive of people with a variety of needs? That this isn't a singular ministry entity, because I mentioned earlier that how we're seen by others actually shapes our identity. And this is how God designed it. And in the Garden of Eden is a beautiful thing, that, man, to be in Eden and be seen by God. And of course, our identity is secure and stable and it's beautiful. But in our fragmented world, it goes both ways. It's both beautiful and it's harmful. Like I have a couple little kids at home, and if I look at them every day with disappointment, they're going to come to the conclusion that they are disappointments. If I look at them every day with delight, they see me seeing them, they see me delighting in them, they come to the conclusion that they are actually delightful and worth something. That actually how God has designed us is for the way that we see others seeing us actually to have an impact in the shaping, for good or for bad, of our sense of identity. And if we keep special needs in this small segment, but we don't actually wrestle with how as a church do we engage this, what ends up happening is we have a family that comes in and is met by the special needs ministry, and then they engage with the larger community who's looking at them with confusion and uncertainty about, do they even want them here, and how do we adapt? And now the whole church. And so now in this little micro moments, they're received with welcome and care. And then they go into the broader community, and there's confusion, disappointment, and uncertainty that then destabilizes whatever was experienced in the ministry. And we have churches that have incredibly well-intended people in ministries where the church as a whole actually undermines the ministry, because it creates a place of incongruence because our communities don't actually know how to welcome, they don't know how to see, they don't know how to attend to trauma. So like that question of like, we need all of us. And if it isn't all of us, it's not going to work. Because some families do need to stop and go, oh, there are some woundings that we carry that are actually going to disable us. If I have a broken leg, I can't go walk with you. I got to allow that leg to heal before I can walk with you. But there's some of us whose wounds actually are healed as we walk. And we need opportunity for some of us as special needs families who maybe have been ostracized and said, you have nothing to offer. Being welcomed in to actually contribute becomes part of the healing process. So I think we can't predetermine who gets to participate and how. It's not an individual, and it's not even about the individual family. It's about how do we as a community attend to the pain and suffering and trauma as a whole. How do we respond to it? How do we see it? How do we create space for it? As that language that Amy said, that creating space takes time and is slow, but we got to start in that spot. Other things that are coming up, I have one other thing I want to hit on, but I want to spend a little time here. What else is coming up?
So I'll just speak like from a personal context. I mentioned yesterday, like my nephew is autistic, right? And he's an autistic adult that does not attend church because there's not really a place for him at their church, because his functional level is not at the adult level, so on and so forth. But I think that, and maybe this isn't like for all special needs families, I don't know, or on all church contexts where maybe some churches do this better, I don't know. But I think sometimes the siblings of special needs kids get forgotten. Like the weight that they carry gets forgotten. That it's not just the parents that carry the weight of the need of the child.
Yeah. Virginia, thank you for naming that. And this is where trauma jacks up entire family systems, right? Pain disrupts the whole family system.
Yeah.
That there are no unimpacted people in a family system.
Right.
That gets disrupted either because of the disproportionate need of attentiveness and care for one child over another, and the impact and the loss. Like, how does a 6-year-old make sense? Like, think about how does a 6-year-old make sense of getting a fraction of time and care and attention from another child who has special needs? We, in our minds, in our grown-up minds, we go like, okay, it makes sense functionally. But 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds inevitably are going to come to the conclusion, I'm not worth as much. That person is more important. The narratives that they come to in this space. And so, Virginia, yes, when we think about this is why, like, it isn't just about how do we care for an individual, how do we treat an issue. Yes, we got a lot of work. Like, how do we actually create space for particular issues and behaviors and needs that emerge for the individual? It isn't that we don't pay attention to the individual, because actually our capacity to receive the individual actually is what allows us to receive the whole family. But being able to hold in mind, it isn't just about the individual. This is about caring for our families. And it is about the siblings, and it is about the parents, which is also why we need the whole family, the whole church to be participating in it. Because if we are caring for the family and one of those kids is in youth group, and we have youth ministries that have no framework for trauma and being a part of a special needs family, that kid is going to get overlooked, and they're not going to make sense, because you're going to have a kid that's in youth group that's acting out because this is a spot where it can actually get more attention, or they have a kid that's in youth group who is operating as the perfect kid because that's how they learn to operate in their family. And because they're the perfect kid, they also don't get attention in youth group, because you got other jacked up kids in youth group that are getting the attention. They recreate the same thing, and our youth groups don't understand the family because they're not integrated in that space, and we don't have churches that are paying attention and go, we need to restore the whole. So thank you for naming that, Virginia, because it has to be. Otherwise, we just play whack-a-mole with pain, and I'm going to deal with this, and this one pops up. And we've been actually doing that in our churches for a long time. Yeah. Yeah. What else is coming up? What are we noticing? What questions are emerging for us? What are we hearing that's making sense kind of in any of those things? Part of leaving space is also part of the embodiment of our conversation, is that actually I don't know who is internal processors and who are external processors, right? And how we experience things, that some of us hear content and someone goes, what do you think about that content? And we're like, I don't know what I think about that content. I just absorbed all of it and have not organized or thought through it at all. And it to leaving that amount of space, right? Even those last, 30 seconds that we sat there, something like that silence means so many different things to so many different people. And the assumptions about what am I sitting here impatient, frustrated that no one's talking? Am I thinking that no one is engaged? Like what does that kind of silence mean? It means so many things to so many people. And oftentimes our own discomfort of what we're experiencing prevents us from going slow enough to create space for other people. And this is the part that I want to land with in a little bit of time, is that one of the places where caring for traumatized families, caring for families with special needs breaks down, is because we actually aren't even aware that it's our intolerance of discomfort that we put on them and ask them to adapt to. Right? That, we're hanging out with someone who talks really slow, or actually gets overstimulated and needs to be in a really quiet space. But we may be really uncomfortable with silence or with quiet. And we're sitting there quietly with them, and our anxiety rises up and our bodies start to get agitated. And this goes, there are things in us that actually prevent us from carrying the burdens that they are asking us to carry. And so if we're going to be people in congregations that are really going to commit to create space for the disruptive experiences that people have had, then we're going to have to attend to the places in us that get uncomfortable. In psychology, we talk about, we all have a window of tolerance, a window of distress tolerance. We kind of need to be in it to grow. If there's not enough distress, we don't grow. If there's too much distress, we flood and get overwhelmed and shut down. And part of, in the church, what I found is actually we have a dislike of discomfort. That really oftentimes we're saying, okay, how do we create a ministry to serve these people? There's a part of us in our minds that not maliciously, but is also framing it. How do we create space for everyone to be together without everyone being uncomfortable? Like, how do we create a context and environment where we can all be comfortable together? And I would just suggest that one, I don't think we're going to do that. You get 5 people together for any amount of time and any level of honesty, and someone's going to be uncomfortable with something. We all come from stories. We all carry pain. The idea that we could exist as a community of people and not activate each other and hurt each other and misunderstand each other, like it's just not reality. But the second part is actually disruption is actually required for growth. that we don't grow in places where there isn't disruption that's happening. Whether we're working out at the gym and we're disrupting our muscles that actually create strength within our muscles, whatever the context, where there's growth, there's going to be friction, there's going to be tension. But so often for us, our discomfort causes us to project to say, oh, you need to do something different. And we'll frame it in different languages. We'll go like, oh, it's really hard for you to sit in our worship services. Let's create an accommodation. Let's do a different service for you. What we're actually saying is, I'm uncomfortable with how you are sitting in our worship service. I want to be comfortable, so let me create a context so you can go and have your needs met in a way that doesn't disrupt me. And this is again, not malicious. I think there's just a part of us that our brains, and I'll say this, our brains will always prefer what is familiar. That the way that our brains are designed is the familiar psychologically and emotionally. The familiar always feels safe. Even if what the familiar isn't good, isn't helpful, isn't life-giving, if it is familiar to the brain, it's going to feel emotionally and psychologically safe. And given the option between the familiar and the unfamiliar, the brain will choose the familiar every single time. Unless we are intentionally moving ourselves in a different direction, left to itself, the brain will choose the familiar, and the brain will also code unfamiliar as bad. Left to ourselves, just moving through the world, we sit, you got some people that sit in the same seat every time. Someone sits in their seat, they come in, there is an assumption something bad has happened, right? Something is wrong here. What that experience is going, my brain is familiar with it operating this way, and what is familiar is now lost, and now I'm in unfamiliar. And brain, every time is going to go unfamiliar, feels wrong, feels bad. It feels like something has been disrupted. And part of what we have to do is actually begin to pay attention and invite disruptions. And this is why I actually think families with special needs are a gift to the body of Christ, because you actually can't prevent disruption. And we spend so much time trying to allow other people to adapt to our familiar that we prevent ourselves from being disrupted in a way that leads to our growth. And so I want to, as we are thinking about these ministries, as you are thinking about training people and establishing things, it is about what are the structures of the ministry that you need to be attentive to. But it also is your congregation's capacity to engage in discomfort. And I'll tell you, part of the discomfort shows up in one of two ways. When we think about emotional pain, when we're talking about pain, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about pain that disrupts our identity and our sense of self. We're talking about pain that disrupts our relationships and our stability in the relationship. And when you have a family that comes in, or you have an individual, an adult person with special, like you if something different shows up into our community, it now disrupts. And for some of us, what that disrupts is I no longer feel secure about myself, right? I like to think that I love all people until someone shows up that I actually don't know how to love. Now I'm uncomfortable because it exposes that I don't know what to do. And I have my own pain related to experiences of powerlessness, related to experiences of failure, that in that moment, this person is doing nothing wrong. They're just showing up as they are. But it creates a thing that is unfamiliar that now I feel like I have failed to do, which triggers my pain, my family, my childhood. And I'm sitting here feeling like a failure in this moment. And to try to not feel like a failure, I'm going to put it on the other person and say, oh, we need a ministry. This person needs a buddy. We need something to do with this person, really, so that I don't feel uncomfortable in my own pain. And so if we're going to be communities that actually say we want to be inclusive and welcoming to all, it's going to activate whatever pain we carry. Whatever experiences that we've carried through our life that we try to prevent feeling, it is going to get bumped, whether that's experiences of injustice. If we come up, maybe we've grown up in families where other people got more attention and care. And we're going to welcome special needs families into our church who are going to need more attention and care. So now I'm in a church family where I don't get attention and care because it's getting yeah, that's going to activate my sense of injustice. That's going to activate whatever sense of worthlessness I had in my childhood that comes back up. And so unintentionally, and now I'm going to be trying to create some reasons like either get clingy and I need care. It's going to create disruptions. And so we need some places of training. And this is a lot of what I do with Church Wellco is actually how do we as communities create culture and language and understanding of the pain in us that is going to show up when we actually start to get messy with families that are dealing with trauma. Because someone walking in with trauma is going to disrupt me. Because they don't know how to process their story, which means I don't know how to process the story. And whatever that experience is going to be disruptive. So as we are thinking about trauma, how do we attend to trauma? We cannot overlook the way that it's going to be disruptive to us, which is going to cause us to feel discomfort, which our brains are going to say bad, wrong, dangerous. And inevitably, we are going to try to separate, remove the source of that danger. And we're going to unintentionally create more siloed communities in more marginalized spaces that instead of being inclusive communities, we actually marginalize people within our own church and have secondary churches and secondary ministries. And we end up with this bifurcation split because we as the whole, as the body of Christ, have difficulty with our own places of discomfort. And so due to time that we could spend a lot more time, if this is stuff that you're recognizing in your churches, is needed, let's talk more. Like this is an area to me. Special needs is not my area of expertise. How we talk about pain in our communities and how we create cultures that actually can attend to that, that is my area of expertise. So if there are some more conversations in that that we could have, I'd love to talk to support your congregations, because if we're really going to create sustainable access to community for people with trauma, with special needs, and for their families, we're going to also have to do our own work to make sure that we are able to be hospitable, because part of hospitality is welcoming people in. But when we welcome people in, that means they come in with themselves and they enter into my space, and my space is disrupted. And I need to actually be able to handle that, because otherwise we welcome them in and then we push them out. And we might not push them out explicitly. We may push them out because our eyes look annoyed at them and they know like, oh, okay, we've been at this church 6 months and that's about all of us that they can handle. These people in the congregation are starting to get really tired of my kid messing up their service. It's been good while it lasted. They've reached their limit of tolerance and we're going to go. And the church would go, oh, where did they go? Having no idea that our inability to handle our own discomfort unintentionally caused us to look at people in a way that allowed them to experience, this doesn't work. And then they remove themselves from our communities. So I'm going to stop there. Thoughts, reactions. I do recognize this is, thank you for the reminder, Tammy, that this is being recorded. And so I do recognize there may be some things that we're thinking and are wrestling with that we may not want recorded for all of human history to look back upon and know about. But as there are things that are coming up that you're noticing, questions, I'm just curious, kind of as this hour ends, what you're holding, what you're taking away, what you're wondering about, what you're looking at.
I think for me, it's giving language to what the families or even the children experience, and then how our facial expressions, our hospitality is so important. So I feel like it's a broader church conversation because even this call all included, but some of the language is more specific to even just children, but it's a broader conversation for a lot of different people. And I think as you were speaking, I was even thinking of the lepers that approached Jesus and how the community would shun them and they're out and they have their own special like group. And I understand it was like a disease, but it was a disability as well. And how Jesus was unashamed to approach into that territory to bring wholeness to their lives.
Yes.
So yeah, it was
Yes.
very well
Yes.
done. And so, yes, thank you.
Yes. And Tammy, that what you said, a friend of mine wrote a book, and Amy, you may have talked about this, or we'll be talking about this. Bethany McKinney Fox wrote a book called Disability and the Way of Jesus. Hi, I'm almost done. This is my daughter. You want to come say hi? This is Miriam. Say hi. I'll be done in like 5 minutes. Okay. You want to sit and stay with me, or you want to go back out? In the book Disability and the Way of Jesus, one of the things that she hits really significantly is the one of, if not the most primary significance of the healing ministry of Jesus was actually restoring access to community, which Tammy is exactly what. So it's a phenomenal book, Disability and the Way of Jesus, by Bethany McKinney Fox, if you're looking for a resource. But it has to be a whole conversation, which is challenging, I think, for some of you who may be not senior pastors and in the positions of power in the congregation. It can actually be really discouraging to try to be leaning into the cultivation of these ministries when it actually is a bit at odds even with the larger congregation. And so just knowing that, it doesn't mean we don't do it, but also it may be more difficult. It may take longer because there may be some things even in our own communities that work against the things that we're trying to do. And so take courage, take heart, that if you're feeling that disruption, that's not inherently, it's not because you're doing something wrong, that actually is you're now being the disruption in your community, and your pastor and your leadership team might take a little while to adjust to that. And there might be some larger language that we need to bring in around that. Yeah.
So Brian, James, if you could just send like that book recommendation and the follow-up information and resources, everybody that signed up for All Included, I will make sure to get you those resources in an email so you can have access to those.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, BrianJames, for all of the wisdom. Yes, Miriam. Hello.
Miriam wants everyone to know that she's 5.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Anyways, thank you so much for all of this conversation. As I'm taking notes, I'm thinking, even in this training, as Tammy was saying, we're talking specifically, but really, even after our last night, I text Tammy, I was like, my hope and my prayer is that this isn't a church body, not a specific one room space, but then as a whole church, we just look different. Right. And we every church you walk into is accepting of all kinds. And so that's kind of, I think this is a springboard to maybe having those conversations. And that's where it starts, right? With the conversations that we need to take place. Because if we don't know what we don't know. And then at the same time, we don't need to be fearful of hard conversations. So thank you so much for the amazing bravery in all of the spaces with this. And so grateful for you and this wisdom.
I will step off and I'll see you guys later.
All right. Thank you. All right. We are going to take about 10 minutes or so to take a quick break, take a restroom break, take a coffee, fill up another small coffee cup for Tammy. We'll take about 10 minutes and I'll see you guys back at 10:10 or my time, 10 after, whatever time you're in. All right. All righty. I have 10 after on my space. And so we're going to jump back into session 4, the last session of this training. And this is, we're going to talk about today, or this session, to how to serve your families and what that kind of looks like. And honestly, I've been challenged so much by what BrianJames shared. I knew what he was going to share, but it still hit me. Holy Spirit is working, and I just felt so all the things. I'm hoping that you as well are feeling the Lord moving in this space. And so I do have the technical pieces of how you serve your families, but I think this is so much more. And so I hope as we kind of have this discussion and kind of walk through these spaces, that we kind of maybe think differently of how we do serve our families and what it looks like as a whole and as a church. So for those of you who are just joining the sessions, I am Amy Bales. I created Oasis Special Needs Ministry, and I love working with these kinds of the situations. So I wanted to kind of provide some framework for people to start ministries within their churches as a whole. And so this is kind of how this all came to be. So let's just jump in. I know yesterday I shared with you guys why special needs families with kids, they don't come to church, or even adults, as Virginia has told us several, examples of, they're just felt like there's not a space for them. And so when they have these fears and they have these barriers and they have these spaces where it doesn't feel like they're welcomed in, it causes a problem. So we want to answer that question: how do we serve our families? And I hope today to give you some examples or some ideas or some strategies to kind of serve our families. And so that's kind of where we're going to go today. There's two parts of how we create boundaries in a safe space for families. I'm going to show you a series of questions, and so there's two things. There's creating a plan of care, which is different than creating a safety plan. So let me stop sharing for just a second. I'm going to share something that I call, if I can get it to pop up. Maybe I won't be sharing it. Let me just go back. Sorry. It's not popping up like I thought it would. It's okay. So in the plan of care piece, so this is when a family would come in and you're at the space where they're bringing, like the questions we had last night, you maybe have a medically fragile child or a nonverbal child or something, or even a sensory overloaded situation. So this plan of care would be one of the first steps. And it's a series of 6 pages that I have all organized for you guys to kind of adapt to what would work for your church or your whatever ministry that you're using this for. And basically it's just a series of questions that are giving you the information you need to know how you can serve the family. So it's talking about what diagnoses might have been given. How do you approach feeding, and what is, like, all of the questions that you're like, I don't even know what questions to ask. Over the time of working with special needs families, I've created and also in our books, the resources I talked about last night, they also have examples of plans of care. And basically it's just a bunch of information that you need to serve them well. So if there's allergies, if they have certain ways to be fed, or maybe they are older and they need their diaper changed, or what behaviors might look like and how do you address those. So there are questions that the parents or the caregivers are to answer so that you can bring back to your table, to your team, to your ministry, to your leaders, and say, hey, this is what the plan of care is. This would be what we need to address, and so that we can serve them well. So that's the plan of care. But then there's a next piece to this, which I call the safety plan, which would be the part 2 of the 6-page paper they've already filled out. So for these kids that have behaviors, or there's kids that have just a sensory overloads, or they have whatever the situation may be, and that you need extra, maybe one-on-one with, or maybe you need a space for a sensory room, or you need a space for just knowing that there's something going on. This would be the part 2. This is the safety plan. So this is where you're like, okay, this child that has, or this adult that has autism, I don't know what their behaviors look like. So these would be the questions you could ask. So the unsafe behavior, is there any unsafe behaviors that's going on? Why is it occurring? Is it sensory? Is it because they're bored? When is it occurring? Is it during transitions? Like sometimes we have runners. I don't know if any of you guys experienced a runner, but that might be one of the scariest things, right? When they run off into a space where it's not safe, or you're not prepared to chase. We know we're not supposed to chase, we know that, but that type of thing, why are they running? And is it because it's too loud? Is it because they don't want to be in this space with so many people? What is going on here? And then how do we approach the behavior? So these questions that you're asking is the questions that you're asking the caregiver, the parent, but also your team. Like, what are they observing when, if there's something going on in the classroom, when is it occurring? Is it when it's time to change from games to music? And that's when the behavior happens. And why is it happening? Is it because they don't want to stop the behavior or stop the games and they want to just play games the whole time? So we need to really know what our triggers are. We really need to know what those things are going on in our classrooms and in our ministry. So these are some questions that we could ask. And then if they're not a one-on-one, who will approach the child? Will it be the teacher? Will it be the assistant? Will it be someone you have to call in? Is it a parent? Like, we don't want to call the parents in, but sometimes there's a behavioral thing that's going on that needs to be addressed by the parent. So, who will approach will it be the same person every time? Because that's another thing, we're building that relationship with these kids or these adults that need a redirection. If that's the case, will it be the same person? Like I said before, what's going on before the behavior arises? Is there some triggers that's going on? So the music turns on and it's too loud. Maybe they have some sensory avoidance, that they don't want to be in that noisy room, and they might need some headphones, or they might just step out during music and come back in after. So how can we accommodate? These are the questions that you're asking. Some more questions that would be with the safety plan would be, what do we understand about the behavior? Is it seeking attention, or is it because they're on sensory overload? Because that is how, when we're talking with families and we're talking about people's behaviors, it's communication, but we need to also understand, the level of their cognitive ability. If there's developmental delays, are they really understanding what they're doing? Is it sensory seeking? What is actually behind the behavior? So that's why we ask these questions. We're not trying to say this kid's just acting bad, or this kid's just acting up for attention, or this kid's just not able to handle the space that he's in or she's in. It's how can we address the child as a whole so that we can understand what's going on as a whole. My son that does a lot of stimming, he's not slapping his leg and being loud to be disruptive. That's not the meaning behind the behavior. He's showing excitement. He's showing that he's engaging into what's going on around him. So I'm not going to correct him in a disciplined way, because that's actually just a response to how he responds to being in a space that he's excited about. So knowing and understanding the behavior, and then how do we talk to a child or an adult? How do we redirect something that maybe is not safe? Running out the room, or being aggressive anyway. So how are we going to demonstrate what's going to happen when the behavior happens? So we talk about what that looks like with our team, with our teachers, with the adults, with the parents that are involved. How do they handle it? And how do they want us to, we want to be a support system. So we want to be doing the same thing. So if they're doing this, and it's safe, not all families do safe things, but for the most part, the children that are hopefully coming into your care and they have special needs and this family handles it this way, well, let's partner together. And this is how they redirect or how they handle a situation. Let's see if we can model that in our ministry type, so we can be a support system. So we're saying the same thing, and that there's a consistency there. Because when there's consistency, then there's trust built. So as we're building trust with families and we're building trust with this child or an adult, that is a huge piece. That's a stepping stone. That is, they're feeling welcomed and supported, and they're at the same time learning about Jesus, even if you don't think that they are. I promise you they are. And then when will we address the behavior? We don't, there's some things that we can ignore. We know that there's things that, and special needs that sometimes need to be ignored. And I can be more specific when we have more specific questions in that space, but sometimes it needs to be an immediate, and it always, we don't ignore unsafe behaviors, that kind of thing. What other boundaries might need to be proactive in? Do we have too many exits in the room that we're in? And it's hard for her to keep eyes on all the rooms. And so is this a safe room for one of our kids to be in? Who needs to be aware of what plan is in place? So does our security team, does our greeters and our ushers and our other people in our team need to know what's going on, within our family? And I think that's kind of what BrianJames was alluding to. Are they getting stares in other spaces of the church building? Are we all inclusive and we're all knowing that this child might or adult might need some extra attention right now? So what other things can be proactive in that space? And then always, I think we've talked a lot about, the hard things and maybe the things that aren't easy to deal with, but there are things that the child is good at. Whether my son, who's nonverbal, has no way of really communicating with me, but he has a smile that will make you melt. And so he's good at smiling. He is good at it. And so what is a way that I can engage with him to help him smile? What are some things that I can do in his space that make him happy, that make him smile, that make him feel joy and feel loved? So seeing that, what is the child good at? What can they do well? And let's capitalize on that. If they love greeting people, put them as a greeter with a buddy. Put them as a greeter with an adult next to. Are they good at serving coffee? Are they good at being an usher? Are they good at sweeping up after everyone's done? What are they good at? Let's start allowing them to be in not just something that we see as maybe a project, but how can they be a part of the body of Christ? What are some things that they do? Can they run a computer for our slides that we have in kids' church? Can they join the worship team? I think sometimes we think, as we're talking about all inclusive and all including all the spaces, that we're just worried about, is it okay for them to, be here? Well, why can't they do the things? Why can't they serve alongside of you? Why can't they be taught and be modeled with how to serve the church body as a whole? And I think that's part of why BrianJames was saying this as a church. This is not just as a ministry, but as a church. How can we be all inclusive? How can we see what they're good at and help them strengthen that space? That's got to be the big picture, the big plan, because I think, as we're here as a support system, but we want them to experience the love of Jesus. And I think serving in the church body is, at least for me, feels a space where I can love. And I hope that makes sense. If there's any questions about that, when we get towards the end, I can address those. But we're going to kind of keep going just so we can get everything in and then leave space at the end for any questions. So in the spaces for children's ministry and even adults, I think what might happen is we get really concentrated on can they do it without a buddy or without someone helping them one-on-one? And I think the first, and I know this might be scary and maybe depending on the needs of the child. So this is also why it's a little difficult to maybe pinpoint specific things and address specific things. I know maybe some of you are thinking of examples like, I cannot allow this child to succeed without a buddy first. I just know. And that's the case, I am not saying don't use wisdom. The Lord has given us wisdom for a reason. Let's use our brains and our thoughts, but also let's not be so over. If the parents, now, not all parents, some parents are in denial. I know I can say that because I am a special needs parent. I have experienced some things about denial. So I understand that some parents might be in denial about what their child can and cannot do. So let's just say that and be honest and real about that. But if you are in a space where you can allow the child to successfully be in a classroom or be in a church setting without a buddy, and they can be successful, let's try that. Why not? You'll know really quickly if that's the case, right? And not all special needs children need a one-on-one. They just don't. They can be inclusive and be in that space. The next space would be if you know offhand, or you see it's just not working. They need a buddy. They need a one-on-one person. They need someone to come alongside them and kind of just hang out so they can be engaging and redirected as needed for safety reasons. And then there's also some other spaces that I think sometimes in smaller churches or churches that have maybe not a lot of rooms, that would be the case of our church, a separate room for sensory, or even a separate classroom as needed. So sometimes it's just too loud, it's too bright, it's too much of all the things. There's too many people in one space. I know that one of my daughters, she has a very difficult time being in a church service because there's just too many people. And so having a sensory room, having a space where they can go as needed, you don't want them to necessarily stay in there the whole time, but the sensory room or a separate classroom. Sometimes the behaviors or the aggression or the situation requires a separate classroom. And I know that kind of goes against my inclusion, but at the same time, the safety of the child, the safety of other children are really important. And so I know that sometimes is needed. And then that next step was, I think this is super important for all churches to really understand, is that we're informing our staff. And if you have a security team, if you have volunteers within the special needs area, that they're all kind of understanding what's going on with the families. Now, they don't need to know all the specifics and all of the plan of safety. They don't need to know all of the things, but I think a great overview of what's going on with this family or this child or this adult is incredibly important. For instance, if you have a runner, or if you have someone that elopes and doesn't know what to do in a space, if the security team doesn't know that child is a runner or that adult's a runner, you're going to have maybe a little bit of a problem, because they could be an assistant to you and, preventing them from getting to the parking lot. And I know that sounds incredibly scary and all the things, but at the same time, if they don't know to stop that person or that child, that's hopefully they would stop a child. But the more information, having that clear communication, that is just going to make everything go much smoother and safer for our families. And again, what are the goals of this ministry? Is to have that safe environment. And this is part of it, is information, knowledge, education, what's going on. Not to ostracize the family in any way, right? We're wanting to make that all inclusive, that we see the family for who they are and what they need. So those are some steps that you can take. They don't have to be in that order. They don't have to be, you don't have to use all of them. These are just some things that you could possibly use to start your ministry. Real quick, what is a buddy? So what we do with this is a one-on-one that we assign to a child that needs, or an adult that needs specific attention during our services. And obviously we want to do a background check. We want to know if they have any experience or training so we know how to train them. Because if they're a special needs teacher in the school district, we know that their training probably doesn't need to be too extensive, right? If they prefer a certain age. And then I do references because I want to know, is this what this person really holds and within this realm of special needs, and or if they're new and they want to just learn, that kind of thing is also welcome. The responsibilities of a buddy is obviously to show up. And what I do with this one is that if we are requiring a one-on-one buddy for on let's say a Sunday morning, I really prefer that the parents tell me on Saturday, yes, we're coming. Now, I know that that's not always possible because in the special needs world, we could be having all the plans in the world. And on Sunday morning, things could change and they might not make it. And I understand that. But also, they can say, hey, yes, we're planning on coming, so that when my buddy shows up, they're not constantly showing up and to not be needed. So there's that communication piece. I know that's not always possible, but that's what I shoot for, and that would be my goal for the buddies, so that they can feel appreciated and not you don't understand what I'm saying, because we're all in ministry. Be flexible. So if we maybe need you to show up a little early or a little bit, stay a little bit late for that child, work on developing that relationship with the child and the family, not just the child, right? As BrianJames hit so hard, with the family, what can we do to be closer to that family? And then obviously you want to demonstrate the church values. What are the values of our church? And this is a part of what we want to do, is serving our children and our adults that need that one-on-one. For the child, when they're with that child or adult, they keep them on task as much as possible. And we know that that's not always the case in every instance. Maybe recognize when the child needs a break. Do we need to go get a drink of water? Do we need to take a walk? Do we need to do some breathing? What's going on here? And then obviously keeping the child and others safe at all times. That would be kind of just the short. I do have an application example that I can share. I'm going to share all of my resources with Tammy so that she can submit that in the email. I do have an application and an example of what that looks like that we use, that you can take and use or modify in any way. For time's sake, I'm not going to show this. So I'll just show it. It's a good, this is something simple that our church did for the whole, and how we got the word out that we wanted to increase our buddies in our church system. So let's just see if this works.
Hey, River Church family. Oasis Special Needs Ministry is looking for more buddies. Oasis assists families in leading their special needs child to a closer relationship with Jesus. The importance of a buddy is very significant. It allows the child to experience Jesus in a safe manner that might not be possible without adult supervision. Oasis Buddy Ministry provides a safe, nurturing place for children with special needs while at church. It is a one-on-one within a group setting for the child to have help as they need it. A buddy can serve as a friend or as a mentor for the child they're assigned to. Some of the responsibilities of a buddy are really simple, like showing up on time for the day that you're scheduled, being laid back and flexible. Work at developing a relationship with the child and family. Demonstrate the values of the river to the family you are serving. Help keep the child on task. Recognize when the child needs a break, and keep the child and others safe. Our children's pastor said when she was praying about Oasis for our church family, she heard a few words for the parents and a few words for the children. Rest and restore, for the parents to be able to rest in knowing we are taking care of their children, and praying that God restores whatever the parent may need. And peace and strength, for the children to feel at peace and safe when being with us, to strengthen their relationship with Jesus. If this is in your heart and you have a desire to be a buddy, to help children, and to love families, please come and pick up an application, and we'd love to chat with you about joining our team.
So that was just a quick thing that we were showing at church, and just kind of letting people know the need of that. And so, yeah, it was simple, it was easy. It's literally like a minute and a half. So I think that that's a great idea. If you need some ideas on how to get buddies into your space. And then as we continue talking about buddies and the teachers, I think training your team, training the people that are serving alongside of you is super, super important, that you give them the tools, that you give them. So if a buddy has a specific child they're working with, if maybe their child has autism, maybe some extra reading material on what this is and how we can work through this. And then checking in with them regularly so that they feel supported. And for the classroom teachers, give them tools. They're experiencing this as well, right? They're in their classroom, helping them understand the roles of each person, the teamwork that it takes to do this, and to be aware that sometimes incident exit reports need to be done. That documentation piece that needs to be done. And so again, on this space, I think if you have specific questions or you have a specific need or that a specific training, I am willing and available for you guys to reach out to me if you want me to help train or give you some ideas of what to train and how that process goes. Because of time, I didn't really dive too much into how we train the team. But at the end, I'll give you information on how to get in contact with me so that if you need help in this space, I would be more than glad to help you kind of understand a little bit more about what it looks like to train your team. And because honestly, every church is so different. Every need is so different. Every space that we serve is different. And so it's kind of hard to give you a specific or a way that would address to everyone. So that's kind of why I just kind of give some basics on that. So sometimes we're like, what if we don't have enough staff for this? Enough buddies for this? I'm sure none of you have that problem. It's only us problem. I'm smiling because I'm being a little bit sarcastic in the sense that we know that it's a struggle to get people to help. And unfortunately, this is no different. So sometimes if we can say yes, remember, it's okay to say not yet. But if we can't say yes because this child can be successful in the classroom without a one-on-one. So we mentioned earlier to maybe give them something within the classroom setting. So maybe they need a sensory box. Maybe they need something that they can fidget with as they're listening to your lesson or they're sitting to the side. They don't have to, be engaged, staring forward, looking right at you. To be able to get something from the Holy Spirit, the presence of the Lord does not mean that they have to be staring at you the whole time and totally engaged. They can be fidgeting and still learning and listening and getting loved on. So some ideas for those would be those fidget spinners, cotton balls, small dry erase boards, stress balls, any of those things. I know that says quiet there, meaning that we don't want it to be necessarily a big distraction. But we also know that sometimes people just need something to fidget with so that they can stay focused. And it's okay. It's okay. And sometimes you have to let it be. Sometimes if they just can keep their hands busy or maybe sitting on a sensory, a ball that they can sit on and kind of bounce for a little bit. And it's okay. It really is okay. I can't stress this enough. I know sometimes our classroom teachers struggle with, they're not all sitting in chairs and they're all not participating in this way or that way, but it's really okay that they're not sitting in a chair or standing with the big group. If they need to be away from the group, like my daughter can't handle being so close to people. She just can't. That's too much. It's overload for her sensory. And here's, I think, where we start. It's okay to have conversations with our group as a whole. I know that several times a couple times I have talked about my son Trey, who is in a wheelchair and he can't talk. And so the kids were like, when we talk to him, he doesn't talk back. And I allow for them to have that space to have conversation, right? Well, his brain, the nerves in his brain, and they don't talk right, and they don't talk to each other, so he doesn't know how to talk to you, but he can hear you. And so having those open and honest conversations, and as we, are talking with our kids about it, we also have to be sensitive to our families. And I could talk openly about it because it's my son. Maybe if you had invited a parent in to share some experiences and they could ask questions, that would be more appropriate. We don't want to ever share someone else's story without permission and that kind of thing. But I do think that having that open conversation, like I would say, sometimes Trey moans or groans or makes noises that doesn't make sense to us. And that's just him, the way that he's talking right now. And so having those open, vulnerable conversations with people, with our students, with our kids, with our youth, with our adults, to start that conversation of being accepting, like we've talked about so much, and in that inclusion and having everybody all included in our spaces. This is kind of some spaces where if we don't have the buddies and we don't have the staff, but we do have the church body. And I think that BrianJames really hit that home for us today in that third session. So I hope that you're getting that and you're feeling that. And then we talked a little bit yesterday about adults, and to be honest with you, we don't have a lot of adults here that have special needs, and so I am not a professional at all in this space. But I do know that Johnny and Friends, they have a huge, huge, huge ministry. And if you're not familiar with them, you need to be familiar with them. They have free resources on their website. You just Google Johnny and Friends, you will find it. She has been doing ministry for so long that, again, we don't want to recreate the wheel. And I'll just be straight up and say she does it so well. So go there if you have some specific things that you're looking for. Some few ideas that I have seen over the years and I've talked with people that have adults in their church, having a buddy for them. I know that sounds crazy for an adult to have a one-on-one, but it's really not that crazy, right? They having someone to be with them and sit with them and help them kind of engage, or if they see if there's a trigger coming, that they can help them step out of the space that they're in. If the big space as a whole is not feeling safe for them, like for instance, their sensory is overloaded, they can't really sit in a service because it's too much, too loud, to all of the things. Maybe a smaller group setting, like a house church or a life group or a Sunday school room where they can feel a part of it. But the large group just doesn't fit for them. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes that's okay because each person and each child and each adult is their needs are different, and so maybe we can accommodate them in that way. Teaching inclusion. This is funny that this keeps coming up, but the teaching the inclusion as a church body, that I think, for instance, my son, when he's in the adult service, he's making noises that we're not distracted by that. We know what's going on because we've been educated, and that it's not a distraction for us because we can have some tolerance in that space. So maybe that's a conversation that needs to happen in your church or in your church staff. Have them serve as a greeter or an usher with assistance if it's necessary, so they can, still feel a part of the church body. And maybe you have other spaces they can do. Maybe they can help with janitorial things. Maybe they can help with coffee. There's all these spaces that we have in church. Why not have them be a part of that? If it's too much for their sensory, like we talked about before, maybe having a room separately that they can be in if it's too overwhelming. And then lastly, we have someone in our Foursquare body that have a church specifically for adults with special needs. And so it's called the King's Table, and it's Mike and Carol Gibson. And this is their email address. So if you want to I'll also have this in the stuff that we send out in the email. But they are in Vermont, and they are amazing, amazing people. And they run a church just for special needs people. And maybe they have ideas that you could incorporate into your own church setting that I am not aware of. I'm sure that they would welcome any type of question. So there's that piece. And then we're almost wrapping up here. Sometimes service to our families look like a respite night or a respite day or a respite moment. And respite just means providing that rest for the family as a whole. And when we do a respite night, we do a respite night for the whole group in the sense of all kids are invited. So that would be including siblings and kiddos with special needs. So like Virginia was talking about, you know, how it affects the whole family. It really does. And so when I want to say something, first of all, we did not do a respite night until probably 10 years into our ministry. And that was because, one, we didn't have the staff and a couple other reasons, and we just did not have the capacity to do a full-blown respite night, because this is a lot. And I want you to really understand that this is a lot. You have to take a lot of things into consideration when you're doing a respite event. And that's why the conversations have to be really thought out and worked out before you just invite all of your special needs families in to do this night, because it is a big undertaking. But when you're ready to do so, do you want to do a short event like in the afternoon, or do you want to do it at night so the parents can have a date night? Whatever it looks like for your family, you will know your family's needs hopefully at that time when you're ready to do this. But I also suggest you start short, small, and slow. I cannot stress that enough. You do not want to do this full blown. I mean, unless you just have volunteers coming at your ears, and which some churches might have. I do know that it's a lot. I don't know how to say this. So it's okay to, let me say this, permission to say that you can start small and slow, and it can be an hour. It does not have to be 5 hours long. You can start somewhere. You have to start, but start with slow, small, short. You have to have your volunteers trained. They need to know what it looks like for the night, for what it looks like for, each child that's coming in that has the needs. What are we looking at here? Is this medically fragile, or is this autism? What's going on? What's on the plate here? So your people have to be registered. You have to have the plans in place to create a plan. They have to have those. The safety plans, they have to have those so that you can be well informed, so that there's safe for all people. Like I said before, know the needs of your family, so you will know quickly what they need. When you're doing your event, maybe you can do it in sections. So maybe if you have older kids, they can do, this is craft time, this is music time, so make it structured. What I do know about special needs and kids with trauma is schedules and structure brings safety. It brings stability to the situation. So if you're just having a free-for-all night, you're probably going to see some behaviors. You're probably going to see some moments that aren't feeling very comfortable for the volunteers. So when you have a structured event, a scheduled event, it seems to flow so much better for all people involved, for your volunteers and for your kiddos. But also in that same breath, transitions can be hard for kids. And so if you do have some kids or some adults that struggle with transitions, be prepared. Know that in advance. That's part of your plan, right? Do you need a medical professional on site? I would say yes to all that. I would say you would need someone that is a nurse or a doctor or something that has a medical training of some sort in case of an emergency, or in case of something that needs to take, if there's specific diaper changes that have to take place, or feedings that have to take place, or medicines, EpiPens, those type of things. I think it's vitally important. And you're like, well, I don't have anybody in our church. Maybe reach out to a local hospital, doctor's office, maybe your own doctor's office that you take your kids to. Would you be willing to serve for 2 hours at our church? Do the background check, do the things, reach out. you'll be surprised how many medical professionals would love to help in this space. And then obviously you need permission slips and waivers. Foursquare has that available for us in the handbook. So we use those. We use those for our kiddos, and so we can have the information we need if something were to happen. So just, know your limitations. I think this is one of those things where let's be real and honest about we're getting ourselves into, and know your limitations. Know that you can, if a child or a family is needing some help and some care, and it's not the right fit for your respite night, it's okay to say, not right now, but how can we make this work next time? It's okay to say those things. So there is that. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for questions, thoughts. As we're getting ready to close up, 7 minutes left. What are we feeling? Kind of like BrianJames has said, what's the next steps that maybe if someone wants to share, hey, I know this is what I'm going to need to do to kind of get this started, to kind of get this culture started in our church. Anybody have anything they would like to share? I am going to stop recording so we can feel safe to share some of those